Hey guys, thank you for joining me for part two of this IPL preview, Nakul as well as Monty. The team that we're going to cover now is Delhi Capitals. They've also had a captaincy change. Of course, in their case, it's forced, and it's Rishabh Pant leading the way for Delhi. What can we expect different from last season, where they just missed out by one game, lost in the final? Can we expect Delhi to make that final step, which they've not made in the past 12 seasons? I'll start with you, Monty.
Yeah, look, Delhi Capitals. I think they've firstly they've got a they're going to miss out on Shirsaya, who's obviously out for for a few weeks with a shoulder problem, and Rishabh Pant. We don't really know what he's like as a captain. Is a bit of an unknown, but we know one thing, that Ricky Ponting is a fine mentor in bringing out the best of any young Indian player in captaincy. So he's only 23, and we've seen the likes of already some people saying that, the great Imzamam has already mentioned that, he'll probably be surpassing, Adam Gilchrist and MS Dhoni, and I think that's, he's a box office player. There's always a question mark over a box office player. Can they really perform under when they're given the stripes? I hope Rishabh Pant, proves us wrong. I hope he's able to, do really well with his captaincy, and flourish, during the IPL season, and then play like he's been playing. A striker of 200 is, I think, a minimum requirement that we expect from Rishabh Pant. Cricket fans across the world.
And what do you feel, Nakul? Are they going to miss? What I wanted to ask you further about Shreyas Iyer was, are they going to miss Shreyas Iyer, the captain, more? Or are they going to miss Shreyas Iyer, the batsman, more?
I think the batting, to be honest, although they do have a lot of options. I've potentially for the first game it could be Shikhar Dhawan. I'm pretty sure who's in phenomenal domestic form. He's had one of the best domestic seasons I've ever seen from anyone in the Vijay Hazare Trophy. The List A tournament was phenomenal. Stephen Smith, Rishabh Pant, Shimron Hetmar, Marcus Stoinis is potentially the top six. Sam Billings as well is a very, very good player. So I think they will miss him as a batter. I mean, he balances it out a bit more. I'm not entirely convinced by Stephen Smith to the T20 batter. It was a slightly odd selection for them at the auction. Or admittedly, they got him cheap. But in terms of the captaincy, Rishabh Pant he captained Delhi for a season. Didn't captain the T20, but captained the Ranji Trophy. I think captained them to the Ranji Trophy final that season, and also then captained in the. He did captain. He captained the Vijay Hazare but didn't captain in the Syed Mushtaq Ali. This was a few years ago. I think it'll be. I'm glad they went with him, and I'm glad that they went with him rather than Smith and Rahane. Again, we talked about how Rajasthan have had them in their lineup and now don't. And in both cases, if you make one of them captain, they both have to play almost every game, and that I think moves Delhi away from what they have done well since they rebranded as the Capitals, which is be very aggressive with bat and ball and really come at teams hard. Last season they were a bit. I know they got to the final last year, but they were a little bit hesitant, and they weren't. When they started losing a few games, they went hyper cautious, and you could see that with Pant was quite inhibited last year. I think he barely went just over a run of ball, which for Rishabh Pant it's just not what you pick Rishabh Pant for. The way he's playing at the moment with such freedom and such confidence and he's recognised just how good he is. If he plays like that again, it's going to be very difficult to stop. So I like the move of making Rishabh Pant captain.
Yeah, and I interviewed Vikrant Gupta, the India Today senior editor, last week, and I asked him about Rishabh Pant, the captain. And he said to me that Rishabh Pant was quite disappointed at not being picked as the Delhi Capitals captain initially when they picked Shreyas Iyer. Being a Delhi boy himself, having grown up in Delhi, he felt when Gambhir retired, it would be his responsibility to take. And of course, that didn't happen. So he also has that chip on his shoulder because he wants to prove to the management that he's a good leader too, and that they should continue with him when next season, when that opportunity comes to rebuild the squad, they should build it around him. Do you
Yeah,
two agree
I
with
know
that?
he was. I mean, he was super disappointed to not be made captain for the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy that year, and they gave it to someone who hadn't been playing through that. Sangwan, Pradeep Sangwan, who was not a particularly popular figure in the in the Delhi squad. I mean, Delhi have had a lot of issues at state level over the years. You know, they're sort of like a bit. If you're a county fan, they're a little bit like Yorkshire in the sense that they're a big traditional team who will occasionally just collapse in a massive infighting. But yeah, I don't think Rishabh Pant particularly has to prove anything to anyone. We've seen how good and how destructive he is and how good a player he is. I'm excited to see what a team under him is led by. One thing that it'll be a slightly odd-looking Delhi team for the first game. Kahisa Rabada and Anurag Norkia won't be available for the first game because they'll be on quarantine after coming back from international duty. Rabada, the leading wicket taker last year. Norkia was brilliant last year for them at all stages of the innings, was the fastest bowler in the tournament. Akshar Patel also has tested positive for COVID and might not be available for that first game. So we could see Chris Woakes, and Monty was talking about the English players, and Chris Woakes and maybe Tom Curran, although Tom Curran's not been in very good form.
Yeah, so Monty, of course, he touched upon it, so now I'll come to you for the English perspective. Do you expect Tom Curran and Chris Woakes to get a lot of game time this IPL?
Yeah, well, I think in particular, Chris Woakes, he hasn't really featured over the last 6 months, and he's probably scratching his head and think, over the summer I was very much part of the England team, and now I sort of feel like I'm a sort of fringe player. But he'll be something I think, he'll be very hungry to be playing again, and especially with crowds. Hopefully we'll see some crowds, during the IPL at some stage, and with the cases rising, unfortunately, let's say it doesn't have too much of an impact with the crowds. But, I think from a player's perspective, I think Chris Woakes will be hungry to play again and showing, his credentials, because, he would still, I think, want to prove a point, to Owen Morgan that I want to be, still in that squad. And, potentially there could be a shootout between Tom Curran and Chris Woakes when it comes to the T20 World Cup. So, I like Chris Woakes. He's a good, solid cricketer, good batsman, hits, can bat probably anywhere in the top 6, and bowling wise as well. He can open the bowling really well. He's a good death bowler. He's just a good, versatile cricketer, good all round, solid cricketer. And the only concern is because he's, maybe a bit too good in English conditions. He's just a good all-rounder in England, and I think that's something that, if that's the case, then maybe hopefully we can, see slightly more, changes or things, like I remember, as spinners, as we speak, Narendra Ashwin always said, spin bowling is like an app. Every 6 months, you need updating, and maybe this is a time when Chris Woakes needs an update.
Yeah, it's nice you mentioned that, because Chris Woakes for KKR was brilliant. I'm a KKR fan. I've mentioned this in the past as well. And he was brilliant for KKR, and then he got to RCB and he just didn't get any opportunity to showcase his skill. So maybe it's a time for him to even showcase his skill to the rest of India and the IPL watchers that, I'm still around and I'm still here. But sorry, Nakul, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like we were talking about with Billings, or with Livingston rather. Given you can only play 4 overseas players in the 11, Chris Woakes might be one of those very good players who doesn't get as much game time as he might, just because of how the balance works. Like if everyone's available, Stoinis, Norkia, and Rabada will play. You'd imagine pretty much every game, unless they want to rest Norkia and Rabada a little bit. So then it's one slot, and then it's, you've got Smith and Hetmeyer in the batting, and then Woakes would, I guess, be the option as a bowler. I think Chris Woakes, you're right, Chris Woakes is and both of you are touching it, Chris Woakes is a very good bowler. He doesn't play, he really isn't England's T20 setup and hasn't been for a while. But we saw how much England missed him in the one-day international series against India. His ability, his experience, his nous as a death bowler, and that's a valuable skill for any T20 team. So Chris Woakes would absolutely not let anybody down if he does get some game time this year. I don't see many games where Delhi are going to be picking 3 overseas bowlers. So it's just this is what the IPL is. It's incredibly competitive. The depth of quality is very, very high, and there's a lot of players who, through no fault of their own, won't get as much game time as they should.
Yeah, and I think obviously we expect him to play the first game when you said Rick Norta and Rabada won't be playing. So if Vokes takes his opportunity and does well, and say Marcus Stoinis fails, you might see a time where he's preferred to Stoinis as the all-rounder, and so it's on him also to grab his opportunity and see to try and force his way into that Delhi setup. But lastly, I wanted to ask you guys, where do you see Delhi finishing in the playoffs? I'll start with you, Monty, and then Nakul.
Yeah, well, look, Delhi's going to be one of them strong teams. They've got a really good coaching setup in terms of Mohamed Kaif and Ricky Ponting. I think they work really well. Ricky Ponting is the more sort of extrovert leader, and gives his opinions. While you've got the other Mohamed Kaif in the background, sort of quietly taking the notes. So I think that's one of the key success of this Delhi Capitals team is the coaching setup. So yeah, we expect them, to be in that top four. It would be disappointing. I think Ricky Ponting, has high standards, and after such a successful season last year, I'm sure some of some of the people within the BCCI would like to continue to see the growth of Mohamed Kaif as the coach, because as we know in this IPL, they're obviously looking for youngsters to come through, but also coaches. Coaches of Indian heritage in the IPL is important to see. So, yeah, I expect Delhi Capitals to continue to grow and make it in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's serious quality throughout this Delhi team. Prithvi Shaw was a massive disappointment for them last year. He's been in stunning form this year, as I said earlier. Him being back in form is a massive plus. Rishabh Pant will surely be better than he was last year. Well, last year was just a blip, one would imagine. And there's a depth of quality. There's a lot of very good Indian players in the team. You talk about Dhawan and Shaw and Ashwin, Umesh Yadav, who they've got in. Ishant Sharma should be able to play more of the tournament this year. Rishabh Patel, who had a very good season domestically for Gujarat, there's a player they picked up this year. And there's a lot of good overseas backup as well. So I would expect Delhi to make the playoffs. I think it will be a disappointment if they didn't. And again, talk about the venue breakdown. One thing with this IPL is that teams aren't playing their games at home. So teams are going to be playing in one of four venues and sort of will play a leg somewhere, then move on, then move on, then move on. They're playing... Delhi actually haven't done very well in Delhi because the pitch is quite slow. They're only playing 2 games in Chennai this year, which is the slower pitch. The rest of their games are in Mumbai, Ahmedabad and Kolkata, all of which are faster pitches, so actually which suits them very well. So I think that's worked out in their favour. So I would expect Delhi to make the playoffs. And Monty's right. I think that for a team led by Ricky Ponting and with this depth of talent to not make the playoffs would be a disappointment for them.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll find out by next month this time where Delhi stand in terms of making the playoffs. So thank you guys for joining me for part 2 of this IPL preview, and I'll see you in part 3.